This is On Diversity, a podcast series by the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore. This is the 4th season, and I'm your host, Liang Kaixin, Associate Director of IPS and also a former journalist. Today's episode is on the pronoun movement and identity politics among Singapore's youth. We have Dr. Michelle Ho, Assistant Professor of Feminist and Queer Cultural Studies in the Department of Communications and New Media at the National University of Singapore. We also have Chloe Ang, a master's student at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and UNUS College. They identify as non-binary and queer and have been using they/them pronouns for a few years. We also have a third speaker who's Muddarius Husayn, who identifies as they/he and has always been queer and non-binary or gender fluid. He's also known as Mud, right?
Yep.
You're an advocate and artist. Okay, so welcome to the podcast today.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
So when it comes to pronouns to identify a person, so we get into identity, and that's where things get complicated and often political or even controversial. So I just wanted to start off the podcast having a small disclaimer that we are not advocating for anything here. We're just having an academic discussion and sharing of life experiences with our guests here today. So a couple of years back, we started seeing people stating their preferred gender pronouns like he, him, she, her, and they, them. And then in 2019, the pronoun they was also like the word of the year, making the rise of the use of the plural pronoun to refer to a single person whose gender identity is non-binary. So maybe we'll go to Michelle first. In your research, have you observed any notable trends or shifts in how individuals and societies perceive and discuss gender identities and pronouns in Singapore?
Thank you for your question, Kaixin. So I have to say that I haven't done research on this topic in Singapore just yet. So I think my points will be mainly from observing my students who I teach. And I do teach different classes at NUS. And so I do think, and this is also, I think, an opinion of my students, that there seems to be a generational gap in terms of how they understand gender identity, but also the use of pronouns. For example, like the first thing that they might say to me is that, my parents or my family, extended family especially, they don't really understand the need for this, or they don't understand the concept of non-binary, for example, or transgender identity. And so there is this, I think I noticed a tension between young people who tend to, I would say, embrace different or diverse gender identities and sexualities, as well as they're, I guess, eager to learn, new sort of new understandings and new learn about the other person's pronouns and chosen names and things like that. So that's my general observation.
Okay, so today we have two guests who both identify as non-binary, but they have rather different backgrounds. So maybe Chloe, we'll start with you first. You used the pronouns they, them for the past few years, and you are currently dating someone who is cisgender, but you identify as pansexual. So, okay, it's a bit confusing to me, but can you share your personal journey?
Okay, hi. It's... Okay, just to break it down, basically, I identify as pansexual, and so to that, that means that I am attracted to individuals of all gender identities. I do not have a preference for or against any specific kinds of gender identities, and so because I am rather feminine presenting, or at least to the public or to a random person on the street, I look female. And because my partner, he is a cisgender male. And so we look like a typical, as what they say, a straight couple, a cis-het presenting couple, a cisgender heteronormative kind of couple. So it does get confusing for people, especially when they do ask my partner, like, what does that mean for him? Because he's dating someone who is identifying as non-binary, uses they/them pronouns. So does that make him also queer, or are we still considered like a straight couple that can do like the whole BTO thing and like go get married and all that stuff like that? And so there is that sort of confusion that definitely comes with these kinds of like identity and how it layers upon each other. Yeah, I'm not sure about whether that answers the question, but I think that's just my understanding of how maybe in appearance-wise, there is a certain way that we are being presented and there are certain privileges that are being conferred because of such appearances. But in terms of our own individual understandings of ourselves and our relationship, it may differ very widely. Yeah.
Okay. So just to follow up, because you mentioned that, I mean, I can see you now, but our audience can't see you, but you look very feminine.
Yeah. I'm just a little girl.
So how do you identify yourself as non-binary then?
Because the whole premise about gender identity is that you don't have to present or look a certain way in order to qualify yourself as being a certain way. So, for instance, I know that I know a person who does present very femininely, but he uses he, him pronouns. And so, of course, people will be confused, like, why are you spending all that energy and time, like, dressing up, looking feminine, only for you to identify yourself with he, him pronouns? And he was just like, because he has absolutely no correlation whatsoever between how I present, the clothes I wear, they're just fabric, and and all it's like, it just doesn't have any correlation. It doesn't have to be. So it's like, it's not that complicated as long as you don't try to string these things together and try to make it unnecessarily complicated. Yeah, so I suppose the non-binary part for myself feels very, and it feels enlightening because I also kind of like the faces people get when they're confused.
You like confusing people.
No, I'm just like, because firstly, they them pronouns, they fit for me. I feel like they fit for me very well. I like it when people refer to me as they them, even though I present arguably more feminine now than when I was using she, her pronouns. I like that kind of complexity and that kind of almost spiritual kind of flexibility and fluidity that gives me, that even though these are the clothes I like to wear, I like to wear my makeup a certain way, but like that doesn't define who I am, and I can just change whenever I want to. And I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Okay, so I think we'll go to Mood then, because
sure.
you are also identifying as non-binary, but I think your story is totally quite different. You're assigned male at birth, and you always identify as queer and gender fluid also. And you use the pronouns they, he, which is different from Chloe's they, them.
Yep.
Can you explain this?
Sure, I'm very happy to explain it because I think Chloe touched on a lot of important things when it comes to being non-binary, because at the core of it, I believe personally, it is a personal journey. Like no one else can define your non-binariness. You know, like what you wear, what you look like, how you are. And for me personally, I've always felt, or I've always known that I never fit into a certain category. Like growing up, the boys would reject me, the girls would reject me. So it's always like I'm always the in-between. Of course, I'm still a middle child, but I didn't have to be a middle person in general. But that's how society saw me. So for me personally, it was never defined by myself. It was always defined by others, like what am I supposed to like? What are things I'm supposed to do? But I never gravitated to one or the other. I just liked the things that I liked. You know, yeah, of course, certain things were more traditionally feminine or traditionally masculine, but I liked them. And I think that is at the core of it, what it is to be, or what it means to be non-binary. And for me, being assigned male at birth, I've always had a more softer, gentler personality and nature to me that just came out naturally ever since I guess I was born. I didn't really like violence aside from like superhero stories. So for me, like the whole idea of like fighting or the masculine struggle never really appealed to me personally. But the idea of like growing up and like getting to a certain point, or like the struggles they were. So it's a very intersectional approach. There's never like a one or the other, but there will always be relations to every non-binary person. I think the core of it is that we are just people and we just feel as people. And everything else is just what society wants us to be. And I think that's what a non-binary person to me is.
Okay. So Michelle, then I want to go to you. Would you be able to tell us more about how maybe academically speaking, how does this come about when people started using pronouns and started identifying with gender neutral pronouns? Then yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I can add. I mean, the two of them have really shared their very rich stories. I totally agree. But I think, what they've both been saying is that at the core of it, it's really about the person themselves and what they identify with. I think where this, the side of confusion can come from, it's because we feel that our gender identity aligns with our sexual orientation, and then it aligns with gender presentation or expression. And then when people do not, or people identify in ways that these three, domains do not align, that's when the confusion can come up. So I think generally I start my class, if I'm teaching, sorry to go into teaching, but I think this is one of the first thing that I tell my students, that look, there is gender identity, which is different from sexual orientation, which is different from gender expression or presentation. And I just show them the gender unicorn. And then they look at that and they're like, okay, this is the visualization. So granted, this is not, the gender unicorn is not a perfect representation. Of course, there are more, I think, categories. There's always more categories. There's always more terms to use, and pronouns as well. It's ever growing. It's not a perfect image, but at least it gives them something to hold on to. So I think it gives the cisgender, heteronormative, heterosexual people, folks in general who are unable to grasp these understandings, something to look at and to say, okay, this is when, people feel that, these things are not aligning, and that's why they are, using they, them pronouns, or they identify as non-binary, they reject the idea of being gendered. So that, I think, helps them to, understand. So I think I moved away from your question. If you can remind me, what was it again?
Okay, I mean, I was just really trying to sort of unpack what's happening here, because I think in the context of Singapore, even though this whole non-binary, all this started coming out quite long ago, right? Many years ago, maybe 2015, 2016. But, in Singapore, how do you describe the landscape here? And, I'm sure there are some groups out there that, not just in Singapore, that don't recognize gender pronouns that are different from their biological sex, right? So, I mean, I just wanted to know, in Singapore, how would you describe, what's happening here?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think, I need to do, obviously need to do research, and maybe we need to ask the experts who have been doing research. Maybe there are people in linguistics, I believe, doing some research. I'm not in linguistics, so I cannot speak for them. But I think it may be that because we are using the English language as the lingua franca, that it makes it easier for us to embrace, the pronouns. Because I've also done research in Japan, and they tell me that the they, them thing, the pronouns thing, is actually a Western concept. And it's also something that it's if you are English speaking, because in other languages, it may not easily translate. And that is when the pronoun thing gets a bit difficult for them. So for people, even in Japan, for people who are non-binary, they may not be comfortable using they, them.
Okay, then I mean, to Chloe and Mood, then in your own experience, have you encountered any pushbacks? Are people rude?
I think personally, I've never had pushbacks per se. My general inner circle, I've had a lot of great people who just see me as I am. I personally, if you were to ask me about the question of pronouns, right? Because that's what we're discussing here today. Pronouns has never been something that I personally struggled with. I think it's an individual struggle. Why I use they specifically is because to me, my identity shouldn't be defined by how you see it. So for me personally, I'm comfortable with every pronouns. But even for like the example of the pronouns she and her, I had to do some like internal work to understand what that means to me, because that word itself was weaponized back then. And even if you look at it in like a context of in Japan or in Korea, they do have more patriarchal binary terms to talk about their elders, to talk about the people who they are around with. So of course, it becomes about what does that word mean to that culture, to those people. And yes, I do agree that the whole pronoun situation, or whatever you want to call it is a more Western concept, because naturally we all use English, and English for Singapore, and I feel in Singapore's context, it is something that we all use. So I think the confusion here is about using, for example, like they, them in a singular pronouns. It does exist in the English language. It does not exist. It's just about like how you grasp your mind around it being a more singular aspect versus it being more plural aspect. And I think like the reason why young people would be more open to it is because they don't see that distinction. I think because like even if you look back historically, like 50 years ago, even 40 years, 20 years ago, people had they studied a certain form of English, and now they've expanded it. And even in social media, the way people talk in social media is different. Words they use is different. So things are ever changing, and it's more about adapting and understanding versus like just knowing and saying like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be versus like what it's not supposed to be, right? Yeah, this is how I feel about it.
Okay, Chloe?
Yeah, I think what is the most pertinent to me with regards to this topic is actually not only just the language part, because language in terms of non-binary or like gender-neutral kinds of pronouns, even the Malay language, because my partner is Malay Muslim, so he keeps like saying like, we originated the original they, them pronouns, okay? Because
Yes, correct.
Yeah, because they use dia
Yes.
to refer to
Everybody.
everyone. Yeah, so it's like, oi, you know? Oi applies to everyone. Oi maybe is a gender neutral term of endearment or something. Yeah, but there are so many languages that actually have had such fluidity that comes with referring to someone not based on their gender or appearances. But so I think the claim that they, them is a Western concept, I understand where they're coming from. Just that sometimes I'm like, is it really that revolutionary, like coming from the Western side of the world? Because when I was just thinking about, okay, so how do I actually go about saying like, you know what, this maybe didn't originate just purely from like, you know, American culture wars and stuff. There is, I mean, in Hindu mythology,
Yep.
there are so many like gender fluid or like gender queer
Fluidity.
kinds of religious
Right.
figures. Even in Buddhism, like Guan Yin Pusa, like she's, I mean,
Sometimes a he, right?
Yes, she's sometimes a he. For instance, depending on who you ask and which depictions come about, and so I'm not sure if this is such a novel concept or like whether, for instance, the Western world can actually claim credit for this, because
They can't.
Yeah, really. Yeah, because I have friends in India who say that there have been third gender individuals who have been revered in culture for like millennia until, you know, certain
Colonialism.
Can I, yes, thank you. Also, can I say that?
I mean, why not?
Colonization happened, and so they've always had a role. We've always had a place in society, you know, different cultures. But you know, since when did the cultures that try to eradicate us try to claim credit for these things? I'm like, It's a very interesting. So I think it's even more interesting to think about why such discussions have been steered in such directions, that the forces that are trying to erase us are trying to, you know, claim certain kinds of origin for these ideas. And yeah, it's just a very big puzzle.
It is.
Anthropological puzzle to like try to piece together. Yeah.
Yeah, and to touch on that as well, even in, like, for example, the word dia, right? It originated from the Malay and Bahasa language, and as the Malay person in the room, I can say that the Indonesian culture even had 5 genders. You know, they had the bisu, they had the kalabai and the kalalai. So people who had, as Chloe mentioned, really distinct roles in society, in their cultures, in their tribes. And these are not things that were originated from the Western culture. They tried to eradicate it. And even in the Native American, they had 2 spirits. So there are plenty of like aeons of historical context that were just eradicated, right?
Okay, so yeah, I was talking about a lot of things
Yeah,
at
it's a
the
lot,
same
it's a lot,
time
don't
here,
worry.
and I guess that will be a bit even more pertinent for people who are perhaps transitioning right from one. Can I say one sex or two or zero sex or can I say
gender
one
to
gender?
another,
Yeah. So because there's an issue of misgendering the person, right? Yeah. So maybe I'll go to Michelle again. Then, like, can you discuss any studies or research findings that highlight the impact of using correct pronouns on the mental health and well-being of individuals with diverse gender identities?
So I can say that there are many studies on using not only pronouns but also one's chosen names, but they're mostly not in the Asian context. So I'm going to have a disclaimer and say that the studies that I have come across are all sort of North American, I think, but in the Western context. So they do talk about, and they're also in the medical context, so it's not about like social science, scientific work as well. And the studies have demonstrated how the use of dead names, which is the names that are assigned by parents at birth to a child, so how the use of dead names and being misgendered can be a significant source of distress, right? I guess this is not, it's not surprising. And these are articles that you can find if you're interested. You can go to the Journal of Adolescent Health. There are lots of studies there. One that I guess I looked at was Gridley and al. That was published 2016, which is a while back. And then there's Vance 2018. And then there's also Russell and al. That published in 2018. And they found in their study that the use of a youth's chosen name correlated with a significant decrease in depression, in suicidal ideation, as well as related behaviors. And so this does show us that there is some importance in using the names and pronouns that trans and non-binary folks have chosen for themselves, especially youths. And so this makes sense because, if we think about it, the names have power and they give us a sense of empowerment. They give us a sense of affirmation. And so when somebody uses the names that we want and the pronouns that we choose, then it gives us, I guess, a sense of identity in a way. Yeah, and then I also looked at, I think, more recent study by Brown and al., and this was in the Journal of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners. Again, medical context, they also had similar finding, and they do recommend the use of correct pronouns as well as chosen names in healthcare, because that was a paper for healthcare workers, I think, so that they can ensure better care for LGBTQ plus youths.
Okay, so maybe I'll just go to Mood because I did ask you before the podcast that I asked a very rude question. Are you transitioning in any way?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so
it's a valid question.
Yeah,
actually,
and also
it is.
like the current name you're using, is this your like a side name or is this a name that you came up with to identify?
So I think to touch on both what Michelle said and what you asked, I think the idea of chosen name is about reclaiming your identity, to me personally, right? And I feel that anyone, especially the youth today, who would like to do that, I think that's a very powerful thing to do. Because sometimes the identities that we're given may have been used or weaponized against us because of the world we live in, right? So for me personally, coming up with my chosen name is about being comfortable with my identity. And it didn't happen like overnight. It's still happening today. It's still a progressive step. It's not like tomorrow I woke up and I'm Muddarius. It took a while for me to get there because of the fight back from, I guess, the pushback, the pushback from society itself. So yeah, my name Muddarius is kind of like a stage name, glamour name, if you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. But it is something that I claim for myself. So it's a mix of my birth name and my star sign, actually, Aquarius. So,
Nice.
Yeah, so because I identify a lot with my star sign and my charts and all that stuff, there's a more spiritual aspect of it. So I combined my two names together and I got that. So to answer your question about chosen names, right? I think that was the question? Yeah. So I think it's more about that journey that you come to and what does that name mean to you, right? Like all of us were given a certain name. Do we identify with that name? Because for me personally, my given name was weaponized for like the longest period of time. It was a context of bullying. It was a context of a lot of violence, I guess, with just a name. So for me, like growing up, I kind of like, I won't say rejected the name, but always questioned why was I given such a unfamiliar name, I guess. Yeah.
Can you give us more specifics?
Yeah, sure. So I'm open to say my name is Murtada. So in Arabic name, it's an Arabic name that is not very common in Singapore's Malay culture and Malay society. So for me, growing up, that name was, I guess, used in different ways. It wasn't pronounceable. It was not something that people often come up and see or say. So it was very difficult for a lot of people to grasp what the name was. And I was a shy kid growing up, so I didn't know how to stand up for myself. So I just had to take it. So it's not like I rejected a name and threw it away somewhere, right? It's still my name. I still claim it. It's on my IC and everything. But I did reclaim myself in that sense by giving a chosen name. And hearing what Michelle said about youth having that chosen name, building that chosen identity, it is more about reclaiming the power that they have. And it is very important to respect that, because for our trans siblings, especially those who would like to go to a more gender affirming care process of taking like hormones or having gender reassignment procedures, so those things are, I guess, to a more trans diaspora. It doesn't relate to me personally, because even though I had some gender dysmorphia in my early teens, I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's more about like understanding that I'm happy with my body today. Like I don't need to, and this is just for me, I feel like I don't need to do anything of gender affirming care to be the person I want to be. It could change in 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. But at this point in my life, I'm happy with who I am. But it's not for everybody. Some people may need to do certain types of surgeries to feel like more about themselves. And when you asked me that question, that was
I felt
a bit,
very rude. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, because it does happen in the non-binary community. Some people do need to have certain procedures or gender-affirming care for them to feel a part of themselves. And there's no right or wrong way to be non-binary. I think that's the core thing that I would like to share with everybody, that there is no one way. And that's the whole part of non-binary. It doesn't exist in a scale. You can be more towards the feminine side or the masculine side, or you can be just in the middle, just comfortable there. Yeah.
Okay, then maybe we move to Chloe then. I mean, you look more conventional in a sense, but how do you navigate conversations about gender and sexuality within the cultural context of Singapore, especially with your friends and family? Are there unique challenges or maybe even opportunities that arise in these discussions?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, I actually don't actively at least start these conversations with at least certain friends or family members, because sometimes it is very tiring explaining to them and pulling out the gender unicorn or like the gingerbread person. Like, so let's start with the basics. So gender identity and like, what you have in your body. And I honestly sometimes just put them maybe in very public spaces, like for instance on a Zoom name, or put my pronouns like on a Zoom name, or like on Instagram, or on like my Telegram like display name and stuff like that. And if people see it and people don't use them, or they know what pronouns are but they don't use them, then I'm kind of just like, or maybe I don't use pronouns. I don't use pronouns as a way to engage with friends and family. I use them to sieve out friends and family.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it's just you can't. It's just a basic level of like respect, almost of like it's really just one. Okay, to me, it's like I honestly don't know what the big deal is, because it's just one word.
It is?
It's just one word. Please. Oh my gosh. Yes. You can. I was talking about this with my friend yesterday. And so maybe I'll use their example, because maybe they have a bit more energy to navigate this kind of conversations. And I think when people are curious, they may ask you in terms of what does they and them mean. I've had certain people in my past who have been very kind enough to at least ask in a very polite manner regarding like what do these things mean. And my friend gave me this very interesting tip of like, just urge them to form 3 sentences in their mind with regards, for instance, like Chloe is my friend. They are my friend. So Chloe, so blah blah blah. Yeah, just 3 sentences that use their correct pronouns and their chosen name in a sentence, and so it makes you familiarize yourself with that kind of just because sometimes it's really just getting used to it, or like when I do have the energy, then I suppose I do tell them a lot about, for instance, the ways that non-binary individuals have already been in existing cultures for, I think, as we previously have already discussed, and how it's really just a very natural thing. For instance, even the animal kingdom and stuff like that, there are so many creatures that have, hermaphroditic characteristics, or like they have all types of like sexual reproductive organs, and or like they change genders as according to their reproductive needs. And so it's really not that novel of a concept in terms of it being like a natural. It really is one of the more natural things about us as living beings on earth. And so I think that is how I would go about talking about these things with regards to just, there have been evidence. If you want evidence, I'll give you evidence. Evidence that has transcended time, space, and like, has existed way longer than us. So I don't know if this doesn't convince you, then what does, right? It's just a total lack of respect that you have for even wanting to, you don't even want to listen. So you don't even want to be even receptive to these things. I'm just like, yeah, it's okay. I'm done. Yeah.
Well, then what about you? Have you faced anything like this?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to like my mother tongue or my Malay language, it's a bit easier because there is no gender specific ones, except for when it comes to like sibling culture. But again, for me, it has to do with my internal work, or what does that mean to me to be referred to as this person or that person, the identities, the intersectional identities that I have. But I think going off to what Chloe said, it is definitely about picking your battles. It's about knowing who to converse with. The 3 sentence about your favorite color, your favorite thing, or your favorite food. That is a basic like non-binary thing to do if you want to suss out how someone would respect you. And if they don't use the correct pronouns, then you just know either they are not willing to, or sometimes maybe even they need time to do that. Because I do know that not a lot of people even understand how that works, because they are so used to the English language of like she, her, he, him. Like for them, like, suddenly there's a third one. But it's not that it didn't exist. It's just that it is for this person. Yeah.
Okay. But maybe just one more thing about your identity, because I mean, you are Malay Muslim. So I mean, like, how does your religion and beliefs, shape your gender identity, and then, or maybe how do you reconcile things with your religion also? I don't know whether it's a very sensitive question here.
I don't know whether you want to include this in the podcast or not, because other people will then come having that conversation with you. For me personally, my relationship with my creator and my God is with me. Like in the Islamic faith, that's what we believe in. It's an individual relationship. We do have community building. We do believe in the community spirit. We do believe in the societal spirit. But at the core of it, our relationship with our creator is with us. So for me, if I still do the things that I need to do, if I'm okay with it, then what does anybody else to say? Yes, there is a more patriarchal landscape in what modern Islam is today, but it didn't exist eons ago. It didn't exist during the Prophet's time. He was the one who championed more of the women's rights movement, moving forward with that. He was the one who said, stop unaliving your female-born children just because you think that they had no value, because back then people thought that, I only want sons. So yeah, it's a real thing that has happened back then. So the reality is that all this gender violence or even gender biases. It all comes from people and what we want to put ourselves in the boxes. And I think we haven't said the big P word, but patriarchy is definitely the one that has to do a lot with it. Patriarchy and colonialism are best friends. So definitely,
You should say it.
yeah, I would say it,
And
right?
you
It's
should
just
say it.
whether you want to include it, that's a bigger question. Because it definitely has a space to how I would say non-binary and trans people have been rejected in the modern day era. It's more because of that. Because in that sense, we don't fit the boxes that have been built, that have been constructed. Like, where do we put these people? Oh my God, like, what do we do with them? But at the end of the day, like we said in this part, earlier, we said that they've existed in the Indonesian culture, the Indian culture, the Native American culture. They have always existed. We have always existed. It's just a matter of how people feel. And I think one of your prompt questions was about the roles that we play in society. And I do feel that there is a bigger conversation to be had there. Yeah.
Okay, then Michelle, then I mean, just coming to you, then are there any like ongoing debates or discussions within the academic community regarding this conceptualization of gender identities, and how does this contribute to a deeper understanding of the topic?
Difficult question because it's the debates are always ongoing. There's always something that you wake up and then you realize something has happened. So lots of debates, but I think one thing we can learn is that it is always ongoing. So like I think based on what Chloe and Mut have definitely said is that young trans and non-binary folks, they're always evolving in terms of the pronouns they use, the names that they use, the labels that they use, the categories that you use, and how they understand themselves, right? So I think this complicates, obviously, current understandings of gender identities and so on and so forth. Because as soon as we think we have learned or understand something, then something new will always come up. So I think my sort of approach will be just be open and be ready to learn new things. And I'm always grateful, for my role, I think, teaching young people because they teach me a lot of things. It's like you're not going to know if you are, not a young person in today's society, but I think being sort of in touch with young people makes me learn new things. I mean, obviously, I know the research, but then you also need to know what's on the ground, I think. So having that kind of bridges between the practices that people actually use and the research that's going on there. I think that really enriches my understanding, at least, of how these identities and I guess subjectivities, practices are always in the process of becoming, in a way. So I think maybe something that, and I don't know if this is jumping to the next question, but something that I would advise people to do, and I do this in my classes, is that I always, before I start the class, I always send out like a mini survey, and I ask them, okay, but what are the names? For example, what is the name of the roster? But what is your name? Like, what is the name you want us to call you? And then what is the pronouns that you want us to use? And I will say something like, and if you write that down, we will just call you that for the whole semester. And the rest of the class will also do that. So I think this is good practice. And maybe because I'm in the classroom, so I do have some authority as the instructor. But
They have to listen to you.
Right, yeah, so they have to listen to me or else, But no, just kidding. But I think it's good practice, like in workspaces. I think it's always good. If somebody new comes in, then we should always ask. Like, don't assume that whatever name that's on the ID equals the name they want to be called, because that can be really triggering. And so that is something that I think I do in my everyday life. Like when I meet somebody, I ask them, okay, is this, I will introduce myself and then I'll say, and then I'll ask them what do you want me to, how do you want me to address you? And then I also ask them about the pronunciation, just because, I don't want to assume as well. And sometimes names can be difficult if they're from different cultures as well. Yeah. And as soon as they introduce themselves, then I will know, okay, this is what it is. I think the difficulty is when people assume, and I get students who ask me, but what if I don't know? And I say, you can always ask. Nobody's going to be offended if you ask. And instead of assuming, you should ask and then get the answer, and then you know how to address somebody.
I want to be in your class.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so sorry. Can I jump in a little bit?
Sure, Chloe.
Yeah, because that then based on what Prof has said, then it's even easier if everyone were to, for instance, in a new setting, go around the table and
Definitely.
introduce themselves. Because, for instance, if there are some genderqueer people who, if they may, it's likely that they will feel isolated or even called out or singled out if they were to be asked oh, so what pronouns do you use? Just because, for instance, they don't look in a certain predictable manner. And so even for cisgender peers to be able to introduce themselves and use these use such introductory kind of formalities, it really can foster such a very inclusive and it just makes it easier for everyone. And even for people who present a certain way and you think they're going to introduce themselves a certain way, you also may just be surprised. And so I think really just having such introductions be a norm, it makes things just so much easier.
Definitely.
You don't have to ask, go out of your way to ask. Misconceptions can be dispelled immediately. You don't have to assume anything. People can feel welcomed, included without being singled out. I don't see the problem at all. Just that people are all oh my God, I don't have any pronouns. Why should I introduce my pronouns? I don't have. I'm pronouns come with a language.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just really there are bigger fish to fry in the world. We have climate change. We have wars going on. This is really the least I would say. We don't have to fuss over these things. Just listen to people, respect their pronouns, respect their chosen names, and then just move on. We have bigger things to fry. We have bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because while doing my research, I also found some pockets of community in Singapore who also pull out this thing about you need to respect my right to want to identify people according to their assigned gender.
Okay. I've heard of that. I've heard
You
of
heard
that.
about that, right?
I've heard of that. And that's a more conservative approach on social media. And I've heard those things come up. I've never experienced them in person, thankfully. But if I do, if I could, or if I would experience that, I would ask them, where is this coming from? Someone is telling you something. It's like they're telling you they like the color pink. And then you have to tell them, oh no, you have to like the color blue. Why do you have to assert your idea on someone? It is about their own identity. And I think that just comes from a place of lack of, I won't even say education, lack of respect at the core of it, lack of understanding, lack of empathy even to hear what another person has to say. Because I'm an educator too, but for younger people and even younger kids, they're still exploring themselves. When they have given names, they may even want to explore names of famous cartoon characters. And they're yeah, I want to have that name too. That's exciting. And I'm yeah, go for it. Then tomorrow they change their mind. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody is entitled to their own self-discovery. So with that, those people who would want to be more assertive of for example, if they see me and they are no, I'm not going to call you a they, I'm going to call you a he. I'm okay, that doesn't affect my life, but I have to ask you, why do you don't want to call me a they? Does that affect your life? Are you going to explode tomorrow because you don't want to call me a they? What weight does this word they hold on you? Because if you don't know whose things they belong to, or if you found something on the floor like a wallet, you don't go, that's his wallet, that's his wallet. You don't know whose wallet is that unless there's identifiers. But even so, you don't know. You still use the word they. So it's not it's not ingrained in the English language. It is. It's just that people just don't want to be open. They just don't want to have that conversation. They just want to be this is how I believe and this is how I want to be. But why? Yeah.
And I think it's just from a fundamental misunderstanding of what rights are. Because, I'm a philosophy student, so I'm a bit nerding out here, right? It's a right to something is also, to a certain kinds of conceptions of rights is a right from interference as well. And so when your right to assert something takes away the rights of someone else, that's not asserting your right. That's
overstepping.
That's just oppression. That's just oppression, or an infringement of someone else's rights, rather.
Yeah.
So it's not the statement that, oh, I have a right to beat someone up. sure, that's your prerogative, but you have infringed upon someone else's rights to not be beaten up. So therefore, you should face consequences for such things. It's like you can do whatever you want, but there will be consequences because there is harm that has been inflicted, and you should be held accountable. I think that's just as plain as that. So I think it's from a severe misunderstanding of what rights entail, and also that other people have rights. Also, it's not just them, mysterious people on the internet who have rights. Everyone has rights, and they have the right to defend themselves if needed, but also just to be respected in certain regards. Yeah.
Okay. Then, I mean, we are already almost on this topic, but, are there any further, like, more specific misconceptions or stereotypes about non-binary individuals in Singapore that, you would like to address or challenge? Maybe Mood first?
Okay. Yeah, I think the one misconception is that people would want to identify what a non-binary person is. There is no identifier for a non-binary person. You have to ask them. Even someone who may look traditionally masculine, traditionally feminine, hyper feminine, for example, and suddenly they come up to you and I'm a day. You can't just go, no, you're not a day. That's who they are. So I think the one misconception that I've always heard, even in the queer spaces, is that there has to be a look.
Oh yes, it's the septum piercing, right?
What is
the look?
It's the stereotype of what an NB person is supposed to be.
Chloe?
Typically it's associated with like bright,
coloured hair.
bright, shaved, buzz cuts, septum piercings, tattoos, baggy pants, kind of thing, or like a
Baggy
shoelace
shirt.
belt. Yeah. So there's this very stereotypical conception of what a non-binary person is. Sorry.
I agree. This is something.
It's okay.
It's a valid like stereotype to have, but then that also again comes from the idea that being non-binary is not about boxing the individual. It's the individual is not boxed to begin with. So just respecting and having empathy and just having kindness for that person. Whatever you believe in, whether it's religious, it's conservative, whatever it is, just be like, okay, this is you, and you can believe it. If it doesn't affect your day, it doesn't affect your life, why should it affect your life, right? Yeah. So I think that's one of the misconceptions that is it's just so sad for me to hear, even in like queer spaces. It's like people want to be like, oh, this is what NB is supposed to be. But no, it can be anybody, it can be anything. That's why we introduce ourselves as what Dr. Ho said, like people introduce themselves in their class, because that's a great practice to have, because you don't know who is non-binary. It's not about playing detective. It's not about like picking people out, but it's also about like introducing yourself. And then maybe people don't even know you're non-binary. So it's like introducing yourself. But that also comes with a certain level of esteem. Like you have to be okay with yourself. You have to like slowly come up. I'm not going to force anybody to be like, yeah, you feel this way, so you have to come out this way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting because, I think there are some people who may be non-binary or maybe, they don't want to tell people, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there
100.
are such
Because it's scary.
cases.
To not be boxed, to be like in this like with this spectrum and having to like assert yourself or tell people over and over again who you are, your preferred pronouns, preferred name, chosen name. It's exhausting. It is exhausting, and
It's
I'm
okay,
sure.
let me just be myself.
So there are some people who I would assume who are not as extroverted, or they don't have that brazenness, I would say, to call people out, and that's normal, But that's where it comes from, a level of mutual respect. You have to ask, you have to talk, you have to communicate. Yeah, that would be the problem here.
How about Chloe? Do you want to add on?
Oh, okay. Like with regards to the misconceptions part.
Yeah.
Sure. The misconceptions part, I think the most pertinent one for me is that non-binary people are not confused. Or we're not indecisive. It's not we can't decide. It's not we keep looking from left to right.
Has anyone like said anything insulting like, oh, I identify as a fish? Have you heard of this before?
I actually wanted to ask Prof this, whether anyone has actually responded, because with I identify as like attack helicopter, kind of thing. It's like, so you have to respect me, and my pronouns are like eat shit or something like that. Because there are people on the internet like trolls who say that since you accept everyone for what they say they identify as, then it's just come from a place of like mockery, right? It's like mockery and just a blatant form of like disrespect, or like even as Kaixin said, it's like, oh, I'm a fish now, so what are you gonna do? I'm just
Go to the ocean.
walk straight into the ocean and never come back, please. Yes.
Bye.
I mean, sure, if you spiritually like feel like a fish that day, I mean, like, yeah, sure, if that's really like what you feel genuine in your heart of hearts, then yeah, but like if you're doing it to mock people, and I'm like, girl, it's not a good look for you. It's really not a good look. I mean, even for kids, right? Kids who like every day are like, oh, I used to have a friend back in like kindergarten who would say like when he grew up he wanted to be a train. And I'm like, you know what? Work. I mean, good for you.
Thomas the train.
Like maybe watch like a few episodes of Thomas. We're like, oh yeah, that's my idol. I want to be like him when I grew up. But you know, these kinds of like capacities for like imagination, I feel like that's something to feed into, especially as kids, of like just really imagining yourself and what you could be like outside of what you have been said you could be. And so, but when that is being taken and, for instance, weaponized against you in terms of like, oh, see this thing that you can't attain, like, oh, haha, isn't that funny? Like, I'm rubbing it in your face, right? No, it's not. It's really not. It's really not a good look for you. Yeah.
How about Michelle then?
Well, to answer Chloe's question,
Attack helicopter.
thankfully not. I have not
okay.
experienced those kinds of answers. But I think if I did, then I guess this kind of reaction will tell me that, okay, this says more about them than what it says about me. So I think that may be a teaching moment. So I don't hesitate to call out my students, and they know this.
Oh, I love that.
And when that happens, then they know they're being called out. And that's also part of, I guess, sort of establishing a safe space within the classroom, which I tell them from day one. But when you tell them, it's not the same as when they see it in action. So if they see it, then they know, okay, Michelle's not going to tolerate my nonsense. So I'm just going to sit back down and listen.
Just fantastic classroom management. Fantastic classroom management skills.
Okay, then, but Michelle, I'm really quite curious because I think your research focus is in Japan, right? Then I kept asking you about Singapore, but I'm curious here. So maybe can you tell us more about what's the situation like in Japan?
I think it's not. I mean, it's different in the sense that, I mean, the language is different. So obviously the pronoun thing is a bit not really embraced. But I think what people do is that they call each other, I think if for those in the non-binary and trans space, then they would make it a point to call somebody son. So like a Michelle son kind of thing, instead of, I guess, a gendered sort of end to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that will be like the more, I guess, concerted effort. But other than that, I think it's also similar in Japan in the sense that there are these gender categories that are emerging, and I just wrote a book about this, and it's coming out next year. It's called Emergent Genders.
Plug it.
Yeah, it's called Emergent Genders, Innovating Categories and Living Otherwise in Tokyo. And this will be published with Duke University Press next year. It's about these young people that I hung out with over a year, and these are spaces that are, I think I would call them cross-dressing cafe and bars. So there is the female to male cross-dressing. In Japanese, the term is joso, and then there's danso. So there's female to male and then
Male to female.
Cross-dressing spaces. And these are spaces where the employees dress as a different gender, and the customers are also welcome to dress as a different gender if they want to. But these are just, I guess, spaces in which people feel free to be themselves. And so I sort of theorize these joso and danso as sort of new categories that are emerging. And, you know, as we were saying just now, actually, these are actually not new categories. Since I think the 1st and 3rd centuries, when you had warriors and royal family members who practiced joso and danso, up until like even in religious rituals as well. And then of course in performance we have theater, and I just like spend a lot of time talking to them and hanging out with them, even though I'm like obviously much older, and I'm happy that it will come out as a book. So yeah, so if you're interested, please have a read. Happy to, get contacted and like say how you feel about it. Yeah.
So in conclusion, in a society where traditional gender norms may still be prevalent, especially in Singapore, then this is a question for all three of you. Then how do you envision the future of non-binary representation and acceptance in Singapore?
I had to think long and hard about this question, but it was always at the top of my head, I guess. It definitely has to come from examining the family structures that exist today. I do believe that the word dismantling can be used, but it maybe feel a bit extreme for most people. But definitely something to re-observe and reimagine again. It has a lot of work to be done there. A lot of queer rights still need to be examined. What does it mean, for someone like Chloe even, who is in a relationship with a cis male, and then they do not identify as their assigned gender at birth, but they look like it. So how does that look like to other people, right? For example, like how do they feel when they see them? If not, they will have offspring, right? What would it look like to other people? Those kind of things. And also, I think at the core of it, what does it mean to have more non-binary acceptance people? I think that's the question that people always have, this taboo feeling like, what does it mean? What do they do? Who are they? If you look back in historical context that we mentioned earlier, a lot of these societies and tribes, they have very prevalent and even very advisory status for all the non-binary people. They are mostly in the art spaces, counseling spaces where they play a very important and vital role outside of heteronormativity, which is nothing wrong to that. But of course, that also comes with examining what does that mean? What does that mean to have more non-binary people? Who are they? What do they feel? How do they exist? And of course, human rights plays a part to that as well. I hope that makes a bit of sense.
How about Chloe?
For myself, I think I was thinking about the way that formal recognition can happen in terms of like, for instance, on documents, on different kinds of records and stuff like that. Because I think even before non-binary representation acceptance can happen, there are quite a few things that us as a society has to unlearn. For instance, I was just thinking about even the existing CMIO system. For the fact that we're still thinking and conceiving of certain fluid categories such something so complex as race under you can fit every single, for instance, most Singaporeans in these 4 like neatly defined boxes. And so if even something as complex as race and something that we pride ourselves on, like multiracialism and multiculturalism, we're still thinking in such rigid and inflexible ways. And how are we going to move towards other realms of identity, like gender? So I do think it's a very progressive, we need to scaffold our way there, definitely. And it may take time and lots of changing of minds, changing of structures. But I do think that we can get there in terms of, I'm actually not sure how that looks like. Because even things like capitalism would have to be dismantled to a certain extent. But I think it just helps for us to examine even the smallest things that we take for granted, and see how we can actually have our worldviews broadened based on different things that we do not expect. Just being open, like human beings are such complex creatures, and the more that we try to force each other into boxes, the more counterproductive it becomes. But I do think that one concrete thing I have for instance, genderqueer individuals is that seriously, we shouldn't be recognized only after certain kinds of medical procedures or medical qualifiers. So, for instance, in Singapore specifically, you must have had undergone all the complete package,
Yes.
in air quotation marks, of, for instance, gender reassignment surgery in order to be able to change your gender on official documents and on your IC. It doesn't break away from that rigidity that we're still being forced into. And so maybe even recognition beyond a medical definition, I think that's where, maybe not where I envision us going in an optimistic sense, but I think it's a starting place. Yeah, but I think as queer people, we are taught to expect the bare minimum.
Yes.
Yes.
If I could add to that as well, I think one thing that a lot of people can do tomorrow is to dismantle gender norms. It's like, for example, what I can wear to work, what Chloe can wear to work, what somebody else who may want to present a bit more non-binary want to wear to work or school or wherever they be. You know, removing things like having to wear a shirt and pants. You know, this kind of small steps that can help people just feel more comfortable with themselves. If you want to talk about acceptance, that can be a small thing, you know, like school uniforms. For example, there was a whole debate of I think before COVID, right? About one girl who wanted to wear the uniform of the opposite gender, and she was not allowed to. So why not? What was the issue there? You know, that was gender affirming care for her. So I think that those little things, like how we present ourselves every day, dismantling that structure of what does it mean to be a man, a woman, what does it mean to look like one, or what should someone look like in the workplace or in the school environment? That's a great way to start building acceptance for everybody, especially for the queer people.
I'm so sorry. Last thing.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Last thing. It's that every single person we know undergoes gender affirming care. Yes. So, for instance, even getting a haircut, like chopping your hair slightly shorter, for instance, to even make yourself feel more feminine. Some people feel more feminine with shorter hair, or like even going for like breast enhancement surgeries and everything. All of these things are gender affirming care. They do not belong to, for instance, trans people or like non-binary people or genderqueer people. Even the cishet uncle down the street probably has undergone gender affirming care at some point, in some form, in some permutation that we do not recognize as like being political or like associated with such.
Yeah, maybe he just wanted long hair.
Yeah. Maybe he just thinks it's cool, you know. Yeah.
Like it's
And
the rock era.
long fingernails.
Long fingernails.
Maybe he wants to even do his fingernails at Jewels.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
But it's like deemed work inappropriate. But why? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's all.
Okay, finally to Michelle.
Maybe I don't really have much to add to your really powerful statements, but I guess I am in the business of education, so I'll say education is important. And when I first step into the classroom in any semester, I'll tell my students that this is the start of your undoing. You have to undo everything you have learned, and then we will start again. And they get very surprised because they're like, "What do you mean we have to, sort of throw away what we learned and then we have to start again?" And then I say, yes, you have to do that because there's no way we can do this. And I think that is, I guess, something that I think of as maybe we can do more of in education. And I know I'm in the higher education, but I also hope that it will go, people will start much earlier because these things, they really do. People do need to have gain awareness when they're much younger. They need to have knowledge. They need to figure out things. And I think they need time. So I'll just end it as there.
Okay, so I would like to thank my guests, Dr. Michelle Ho, Chloe Ang, and Muddarius Husayn for their time today. Thank you all for listening in. We've come to the end of Season 4. See you on the next season of On Diversity. On Diversity is a podcast inspired by the Institute of Policy Studies Managing Diversity's research program. We are available on all major podcast platforms. Please follow or subscribe to get notified when we have a new episode. You can visit our website, ipscommons.sg, for more information.